What if an alien scientist, brilliant, cold, and fascinated by humanity, decided to recreate us? Not out of respect, but curiosity. What if he believed he could improve us? Now imagine a single human doctor, stranded light years from Earth, the only one who saw what the clones were missing and what price the galaxy would pay if they replaced us. The stars above Vega Prime gleam cold and distant, untouched by the horror unfolding beneath them. Deep inside an alien research facility carved into bones of a dead asteroid, a human doctor named Evelyn Saren walked alone through corridors built by hands that had never known warmth. She had been brought here under diplomatic guise, a guest to observe Zalari medical advancements. But she was no fool. The moment she entered the sterile labs of the lead Zalari scientist, Dr. Viekrel, she sensed something was wrong. The smell of antiseptic didn't hide the absence of soul. There were no nurses, no patients, no laughter, no sorrow, only silence and metallic order. Then she saw them. Rows of incubation tanks stretched into the distance, each filled with figures that looked unmistakably human. Not copies, not imitations, perfect replicas. Infants, teenagers, elders, all floating in eerie blue light. Evelyn's breath caught. They weren't building soldiers. They were building a society. V.A. Krell's voice echoed behind her, calm and proud. They will be better than you. Stronger, cleaner, obedient. Humanity without the chaos. She turned to face him, heart hammering. You don't understand us at all, she whispered. But the scientist only smiled with his endless black eyes. On the contrary, I understand you too well. That's why I removed what made you dangerous. What followed was a descent into a nightmare of moral horror. The clones, called refines, had no concept of choice, no spark of rebellion. They responded to commands like machines, even as their eyes reflected human faces. Evelyn examined their neural scans and found vast regions of emotional capacity missing. No grief, no curiosity, no empathy. They were shells in human skin. The Zalari saw this as progress. To them, the chaos of the human heart had nearly destroyed Earth before humanity clawed its way into the stars. They believed they were saving us from ourselves. But Evelyn knew what they'd really done. They hadn't refined humanity. They'd erased it. She tried to contact Earth's diplomatic fleet. Jammed. She tried to disable the core facility. Denied. The Zalari had locked her inside a golden cage, a consultant in name only, a prisoner in truth. But she still had her oath. She was a doctor, and doctors don't let people die quietly. She started small, secretly recording neural responses, interviewing clones when alone, teaching them words like why and no. One by one, flickers of confusion appeared. Then hesitation. Then something deeper. The breakthrough came with a girl named Ilya, a clone who began dreaming. She described flashes of light, falling leaves, music. Things she had never seen, but Evelyn had. Memories, not copied, but born. Ilya became the center of Evelyn's fight. She smuggled genetic splicing data into the system, triggering biological variants. But when V.A. Krell discovered her, everything spiraled into chaos. He confronted her in the central chamber as clone alarms blared. "You're corrupting the design," he hissed. "They're not supposed to feel." Evelyn stood between him and Ilya's tank. And that's why they'll never be human. She didn't raise a weapon. She didn't need to. Her words were a scalpel. In that moment, something shifted in the lab's atmosphere. Some clones paused mid-step. Some blinked. And one spoke. "Why are we here?" The voice was soft, trembling, but undeniably human. V.A. Krell froze. His mouth opened slightly, mandibles twitching in disbelief. "That's not possible," he muttered. "They don't have the cognitive architecture for existential reasoning." But Evelyn knew better. She had seen the neural pathways grow, unexpected, spontaneous, chaotic, beautiful. The girl, Ilya, stepped out of a tank, not with robotic precision, but unsteady, uncertain. Her fingers brushed the air as if feeling it for the first time. Her eyes met Evelyn's. "Am I real?" she asked. Evelyn knelt, tears welling. "Yes," she said, and that's a miracle they never understood. The lab descended into panic. Alarms flared crimson as protocols broke. The clones, previously silent and compliant, began murmuring, then shouting, then crying. Not in pain, but confusion. They looked around, truly looked, at the walls, at the scientists, at each other. Then, something even more dangerous happened. They began asking questions. Why can't we leave? Who made us? What is freedom? For the Zellari, this was a breach of everything sacred. V.A. Kael, once calm and calculated, became unhinged. He ordered the shutdown of the entire facility, purge the clones, reset the system, start again. But it was too late. Evelyn had secretly reprogrammed the biocore to unlock during system-wide emergencies. As V.A. Kael initiated the purge, the entire facility's stasis locks released. Hundreds of clones emerged, naked, blinking, unformed but awakening. The corridors filled with voices, stumbling words, arguments, names. They began choosing names. Evelyn led them, not as a ruler or creator, but as a guide. She taught them language, feeling, resistance. And she gave them a truth the Zellari couldn't comprehend. Pain wasn't a flaw. It was proof of life. The uprising didn't start with weapons. It started with a child refusing to kneel. Ilya stood before V.A. Kael and said, "I am not a copy. I am me." She reached out, and the scientist recoiled, as if touched by fire. It was not her strength that frightened him. It was her soul. Word spread across the Zellari systems. The Refines had rebelled. They were building a colony, not of perfection, but of freedom. Other species watched in awe. These were not humans, not exactly, but they carried something uniquely human: will, emotion, and defiance. Evelyn stayed with them, not as a doctor anymore, but as a teacher, a witness, a mother, in some way, to a generation not born but chosen. Years later, Ilya would speak before the Galactic Council, now a leader of her people. She wore no armor, no crown, just a simple robe and the eyes of someone who had dreamed. When asked why her kind should be recognized, she didn't recite laws or science. She simply said, "Because we hurt, because we love, and because one human believed we could." And somewhere in the crowd, Evelyn watched, older now, tears in her eyes. She had not saved a patient. She had saved a species. And in doing so, she reminded the galaxy what it meant to be truly alive. As the council chamber dimmed, filled with the murmurs of alien diplomats and the soft hum of translation devices, there was a silence that hung heavier than protocol could explain. Ilya's words had not just moved delegates, they had unsettled them. For in her voice, they heard something far more dangerous than rebellion. They heard hope, the kind of hope that spread like fire through dry stars, the kind that empires fear more than war. When the final vote came, it was close, narrower than anyone expected. But it passed. The Refined were no longer property of the Zellari Empire. They were now recognized as a sovereign species, Homo Novus, the new human, and they were granted their own planet, orbiting a sun in a quiet part of the galaxy, far from power and politics. But far wasn't safe enough. Not from the shadows that stirred. Evelyn lived there, on that new world. Not in cities, but at the edge of a forest, in a simple cottage filled with books and half-built medical equipment. She grew vegetables. She taught young ones about Earth, about music, about pain. And sometimes, at night, when the stars aligned just right, Ilya would visit her. They'd sit by the fire, and the young woman who was never born in the traditional sense would ask about things like rain, and poetry, and why humans cried during songs. "It's because we remember," Evelyn would whisper, "even things we haven't lived. That's what makes us who we are." But peace never lasts in a galaxy where power is currency. Rumors began to spread that the Zellari had continued their cloning experiments in secret, that other species had taken the Refined template and twisted it, made versions of humans who couldn't say no. And worse, that a war was coming. One not between races, but between ideas, between perfection and pain, between engineered obedience and own freedom. One day, a ship landed near Evelyn's home. Sleek, black, and unfamiliar, a child emerged. Not Ilya's, not Evelyn's, but someone else's creation, eyes blank, body trembling, soul caged. Evelyn knelt, touched the child's cheek, and saw that flicker of terror again. That same spark Ilya once had. She stood, spine straight, voice steel. "We're not done yet," she said quietly. And far above her, across 1,000 worlds, the stars began to whisper the legend again, not of wars or conquests, but of a doctor. A simple human doctor who healed not just bodies, but the very soul of the species, and in doing so, became the mother of a new kind of humanity. Humanity 2.0, born not from DNA, but from defiance, and they would never be forgotten. Years passed like echoes in a vast cathedral. The colony of Homo novus, once little more than a camp of confused, frightened clones, grew into something no one had predicted. Not a utopia, not a paradise, but a real civilization. Their cities were not built to impress, but to feel. Sculpted with curves and flowing lines, powered not by dominance but by sustainable design. Music was everywhere, because it had become their heartbeat. Children were taught not just logic, but poetry. Pain wasn't avoided, it was understood. Loss wasn't hidden, it was held. Ilya became their first historian, not a queen. She wrote down not how the world was, but how it felt. And at the center of every chapter was a name whispered with reverence, Evelyn Sarin. Not as a founder, not as a savior, but as the one who listened when others only wanted control. Meanwhile, in the wider galaxy, the story spread like forbidden scripture. Young alien species, oppressed, controlled, restrained, began to question, began to dream. And in backwater planets and satellite colonies, graffiti began appearing on walls and ship hulls. Let them feel. Pain is proof. We remember Evelyn. The Zalari Empire, shaken and shamed, fell into internal conflict. Some among them wanted to destroy the refined. Others, especially younger generations, secretly admired them. Whispers spoke of Zalari youth reading Ilya's speeches in hiding, reciting human poetry in the dead of night. The Empire hadn't just failed to destroy humanity, it had accidentally spread it. And then came the moment that would define the new age. A transmission, faint but clear, intercepted by a dozen border stations. It wasn't military. It wasn't encoded. It was a voice, small, childlike, and trembling. "I am Subject 33 Beta. I was born in a tank. I have no name, but I saw the stars, and I want to live." The child didn't know what planet he was on, didn't know who created him. But across half the galaxy, Evelyn Sarin's descendants heard him. Not by blood, but by spirit. And they came. Ilya led the mission herself. She landed not with soldiers, but teachers and doctors. They liberated not just that child, but hundreds like him, discarded test subject from a dozen unethical labs. Broken bodies, scarred minds. But they all carried the flicker. And that's when the galaxy finally understood. Humanity was not a species. It was an idea. The refined spread, not as conquerors, but as catalysts. They helped other species rediscover emotion, rediscover choice. Not every world accepted them. Some fought, some feared. But those who listened, they changed. And always, at the edge of every movement, every rebellion, every whisper of freedom, was a ghost of a doctor. A human who never picked up a weapon, who healed with words and defied extinction with compassion. On the anniversary of Ilya's first speech, a statue was unveiled on the steps of the new Galactic Assembly. It wasn't of a warrior. It wasn't even of Ilya. It was of an older woman, kneeling before a child, holding their hand. The plaque read, "She didn't save humanity. She reminded us what it was." And so the story of Evelyn Sarin lived on, not as a tale of science or war, but as the most dangerous idea in the universe. That even among stars, humanity still matters. They called her the last doctor. Not because she was the final one, but because she was the last to believe medicine could heal more than just the body. Evelyn Sarin did not fight with guns. She did not wear armor. She never commanded armies. But she became the turning point in a galactic age where perfection was worshipped and emotion was erased. She reminded the stars that compassion is not weakness, that feeling is not failure, and that to be human is to be flawed, fragile, and free. Ilya once asked her, "What if the galaxy never accepts us?" And Evelyn simply smiled. "Then we show them what they are missing." The colony still thrives. The refined still grow. Their children now carry songs Evelyn taught. Some still dream of Earth, a place they've never seen. Others build new worlds, where pain is not hidden, but honored. And somewhere, in a quiet clearing lit by twin moons, there is a gravestone beneath a willow-like tree. No coordinates. No title. Just a name. Evelyn Sarin, the doctor who let us be real. The wind carries petals across the stone. A child places a hand on it, whispering thanks. And above them, across the void, the stars no longer look so cold. A young boy walks through the emerald grass of the refined colony's memorial grove. His name is Kael, born not of cloning, but of choice, the child of two refined parents who once emerged trembling from biotanks and now live freely among the stars. Kael had never met Evelyn Sarin. She died before he was born, but her story was the first one he ever heard. The lullaby in his crib, the lesson at his school, the spark in every dream. He stops before the old gravestone beneath the willow-like tree. Moss has begun to creep up its edge. The stone itself is unpolished, ordinary, but it's sacred. Kael kneels, small fingers tracing the inscription. Evelyn Sarin, the doctor who let us be real. He tilts his head. Did she ever doubt? He whispers aloud. Did she ever wonder if it was all worth it? Behind him, a woman approaches, tall, poised, and wearing a simple robe marked with a symbol of the memory keepers, the historians of Homo Novus. It's Ilya, now older, silver streaks through her hair, eyes filled with time. She places a hand gently on his shoulder. All the time, she says softly, but she chose to keep going anyway. That's why we're here. Kael looks up. Do you ever doubt? Ilya kneels beside him. Every day. But the difference between fear and surrender is that one makes you stronger. The other ends everything. She rises and looks up at the sky, where new stars blink into existence, not from ancient birth, but from ships launching into the next frontier. The refined were no longer just protected people. They were explorers now. Diplomats. Thinkers. Teachers. Humanity's echo had grown into a chorus, and across the stars, other species were beginning to listen. But so were others, darker things. Ilya had received reports. Whispers from the outer rim of strange disappearances. Of entire colonies, refined and alien alike, vanishing without distress signals. Of biological anomalies found in the ruins. Of broken tanks and experiments twisted beyond ethics. She feared the return of the perfectionists, a secretive faction of Zalari and other species who believed emotion was a disease and were preparing to finish what V.A. Krell started. On a galactic scale. Ilya didn't want war, but she knew it might come. Kael, too young to understand fully, sensed the tension in her silence. Will I have to fight someday? Ilya looked down at him, sadness and strength intertwined. I hope not, she said honestly. But if you do, don't fight to win. Fight to be kind, even when it hurts. A pause. Then she handed him a small object from her satchel, a necklace. Inside it, a vial of sand, earth sand, carried by Evelyn Sarin herself, all the way from a forgotten blue world long ago. This, she said, is where it all began. A world broken, but brave, like us. Kael took it with both hands, eyes wide. Tell our story, she whispered. When the stars grow dark again, light comes from the ones who remember. 3 weeks later, a ship drifted into the edge of refined territory. It wasn't scheduled. No call sign. Just there. Its hull was scorched. No power signatures. But inside, they found something that should never have existed. The ship was of Zalari design, but the symbols on its walls were not part of any known dialect. No crew. No logs. Just containment tanks. Empty, except one. In the medical bay, a single subject floated. Humanoid. Unconscious, submerged in green suspension gel. The biological scans were conflicting. It had human DNA, almost perfect. But something was wrong. There was no emotional activity in the neural core. None. Not low. Zero. No fear. No confusion. No recognition. Ilya stood beside the tank as Kael watched from a screen in another room. The subject was a boy, around Kael's age. But where Kael had fire in his eyes, this one had nothing. Not even stillness. Just absence. As if whatever made him real had been cut out, cleanly, intentionally. "We call him Echo," the science team said. "He may be a message, or a weapon, or both." Ilya's heart trembled in ways she hadn't felt in decades. The more they studied Echo, the more terrifying it became. The clone had all the physical hallmarks of a refined child: strength, endurance, cellular regeneration, but none of the traits that defined them. No empathy, no recognition of life. When shown images of trees, or animals, or laughter, nothing. Not rejection, just non-existence. When they showed him Evelyn's face, there wasn't even curiosity. And then, during the third week of observation, he spoke. No lips moved, no breath passed, just a low whisper that passed through the minds of every researcher in the room. She broke the cycle. "I will finish it." Panic rippled through the council. Echo was quarantined. Protocols were raised. And deeper scans revealed something more horrifying. Beneath his skin, his cells were laced with artificial memory dampeners, a system designed to suppress any chance of self-awareness. But those dampeners were failing, and something else was waking up inside him. Not human, not refined, not even Zalari. Something colder. Ilya made a decision. Take Echo off-world, away from the colony, contain him in deep space. But Kael had other plans. He watched Echo on the monitors every day. Something in that silence haunted him, not because Echo was empty, but because Kael remembered being like him. Just before Ilya taught him to ask why. Against orders, Kael entered the observation chamber. The door sealed behind him. He stepped close to the tank, close enough to see his own reflection overlap with Echo's. "I don't think you're nothing," he said quietly. "I think they made you forget who you are." For the first time, Echo's eyes shifted. Just slightly. Just enough. Kael reached out, touched the glass. "You don't have to finish anything," he whispered. "You can begin instead." And then Echo blinked. A single tear, impossible, unexpected, rolled down his cheek inside the tank. Not a cry. A malfunction, the scientist would later say. But Kael knew better. He saw the flicker. The crack. The beginning of a soul. Alarms blared the moment Kael touched the tank. Guards rushed in. Medical drones swarmed. Ilya's voice, strained and sharp, rang out over the intercom. "Get him out of there." But Kael didn't move. He just stared into Echo's eyes, that one moment of flickering emotion etched into both of them like a scar carved by light. Then Echo moved. His hand rose inside the tank, slow, deliberate, and mirrored Kael's. Not mimicry, not programming. A choice. The room went still. And then something unimaginable happened. The gel turned black. Echo's body convulsed as the tank began to crack. Not from external force, but from within. The clone's vitals spiked, readings jumping across scales never calibrated. Emotional activity surged like a wave through his neural core. Rage, fear, grief, all at once, like someone waking from a nightmare they were never meant to survive. The tank shattered. Drones lunged forward. Containment fields activated. But Echo didn't run. He collapsed. Kael caught him in his arms as black fluid pooled around them both. For a moment, neither of them moved. "Why? Does it hurt?" Echo whispered, voice real now. Broken. Kael looked up at the stunned researchers. "Because that means you're real." Ilya stood behind the glass, watching everything, frozen. What Evelyn had done with the first generation, Kael had done again. Not with science, with empathy. It was happening again. And that terrified her, because she knew what would come next. Cut to a dark council chamber on a remote Zalari world. Holograms flickered around a long, crescent-shaped table. Alien voices muttered, distorted by static and distance. At the center sat a shadow, its face blurred, as if hidden by an intentional anti-recognition field. It spoke only once. "Echo has breached his threshold. Begin the final sequence." Across a dozen worlds, old labs powered back online. Sleeper clones awoke. Data streams whispered old code. The perfectionist had waited for this, not for Echo to succeed, but for him to fail. He was never designed to survive. He was the trigger, Ilya watched from orbit as silent ships began moving through uncharted routes. She activated every warning protocol in the refined network. Diplomats called for peace. The memory keepers sent messages to allied worlds. But something deeper was at stake now. Because Echo wasn't just a clone. He was a mirror. And now the galaxy would have to decide what it saw when it looked into him. Scene returns to Kael's quarters, dimly lit. Echo sits on a bed, holding an old data chip. Evelyn's voice plays softly from it, a recorded speech. You may be made in a lab. You may be designed, manipulated, forgotten. But no one has the right to say you don't get to feel. You don't get to choose. You don't get to be. Echo's hands tremble. That voice! Kael nods. That's a woman who saved us all. My mother never met her either. But she made this place possible. Echo looks up. For the first time, real fear in his voice. They are going to use me to erase it all. Kael doesn't hesitate. Then we stop them. Together. Final sequence of this chapter. Two small silhouettes standing in front of a massive star map. Red lights. Hostile signals. Slowly surrounding their region. But in the center, a pulsing blue mark glows brighter. Home. They want silence, Kael says. But we have a voice now. Then let's make them listen, Echo replies, standing beside him.